Hi everyone, and you're very welcome to the second part of my interview with Tiger Beat editor Anne Moses. Anne picks up the story during Elvis's summer festival in August 1970 when she's filmed for the movie Elvis, That's the Way It Is, attending the opening show on August the 10th and being the lucky recipient of a kiss from the man himself. Anne also tells me about seeing Elvis in his later years and her feelings about what happened to him and her opinion on Elvis's continuing popularity and legacy. Well, then the next year you were in, I don't know how many Elvis fans know this, but you were actually in That's the Way It Is.
I was. And that came about. I got a call from Dennis Sanders, who was the director, and he explained to me how he was making a documentary on Elvis, him getting ready for the show in, I don't know if it was 70 or 71. I think it came out in 71, but it was.
Yeah, it was August 1970.
Thank you. I leave the stats to other people because I have too many of them. So he said, we are going to, I'd like to come to your office and interview you. And he said that then we're going to have you come to Las Vegas for when we're filming the live shows. And it was like, well, no problem. I'd be happy to. So he comes to my office at Tiger Beat, and I was very, very nervous. I think it sounds like I'm just kind of emotional on the film, but I was so nervous. I was never meant to be in front of a camera. I'm the behind the scenes type of person. But he asked me questions, and I did my best to answer them. And they filmed me walking down the hall to the artist's office, and that ended up in the movie. But in our private conversation while he was there, he was talking to me about some other things, and I said, "Oh, we have this group of friends we call an Elvis Club, and we get together, and the guys have a couple of beers, and when they're feeling brave, they get up and they mime to Elvis songs." And he said, "Oh, well, that sounds like fun." He said, "I'd like to come and film that." And I said, "Well, no, everybody would be too nervous, and I don't think that would work." And I kind of poo-pooed it. And he said, "I tell you what, I'll just bring one small camera. You won't even know we're there." And I go up, and here they have a full-size 35 millimeter MGM film camera on a tripod. And it's like, oh yeah, that's real subtle. So at first everybody was just, we were trying to act like any other time, and none of us were achieving that. So the guys, I was drinking some wine, the guys were drinking some beer, and then a few of the guys went downstairs and had a little puff. And they came back up, and they were relaxed enough, and they started singing. We were playing Elvis songs on the record player, and they started performing with a guitar. And of course, I still have video of that to this day, but there's no sound. And so he filmed for like an hour, and then I had another surprise. Weeks and weeks later, actually, it was much later on, because then after he filmed that party and did the interview at my office, then he was busy filming all the rehearsals and everything, all the intros, or the leading up to the live appearance. And so then we were invited, and he invited 4 or 6 of us. And once again, the maitre d' led us right to the edge of the stage, and it was slightly stage right, but you could see when Elvis was coming out of the wings, which was really cool. And it was the first night of filming for the movie. And by that time, Elvis had begun kissing women along the stage. He didn't do that the first night. And we had seen this because we had gone one or two times after that. And I was seated right next to the stage. So when Elvis first came out, he started the show that way. And he came out, and I can't remember what song was playing, but it was like an intro. And he came over and he kissed me. Then he kissed my girlfriend that was with me. And it was not a peck. It was, no tongue, but it was a nice kiss that took a few seconds. And I'll remember it my whole life because it was a real kiss, not a,
Yeah, it was on the lips. It wasn't a peck on the cheek. In other words,
it was exactly, and it was beautiful. I have to tell you, it was a super nice kiss. And then he continued to go down the line. Well, that was all on film. So after Dennis Sanders had finished the filming, he called me up and he said, "I'd like you to bring all your friends that were at that party, and I'm going to show you the scenes from the party and some other ones." And he invited us to MGM Studios in one of the screening rooms. So that meant it was a theater-sized screen. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there and I'm watching myself kiss Elvis on a theater screen. And I just,
yeah,
mind blown.
I can imagine.
It was so incredible. And then everybody there got to see what they look like on the, at the party and everything.
Yeah.
So here they were seeing themselves in a movie. Well, as it turned out, my kiss got cut from the movie and from, Elvis, that's the way it is. And our club meeting got caught. But all of us who were there have the memory of what that night was like, and then of seeing it shot by a professional camera crew. And for us mere Elvis fans, that was a pretty remarkable experience. So it was cut, and I still have, I wish I had the cutting room floor of my kiss, because those were 35 millimeter basically slides. That's what film is, a series of slides. So I could have had an actual photo of that, but I didn't get that. And over the years, people have sent me CDs with a lot of these outtakes and some of Elvis on stage. Where they got them, I have no idea, but most of them don't have sound.
Yes.
So it's not, so it's something, it's like a memory picture of, but, and then to see, that's the way it is come out. And again, the way he put the whole movie together. I got a complete kick out of it because I thought the different Elvis fans that he chose were just such a crack up. I'll never forget the woman who was there with her mother, and her mother was, very much a senior citizen. And they said, my mom and I both love Elvis. And the daughter says, yes, he really gets my Phi Beta Kappa key a jangling.
That's right. That appears in the 1970 version because you actually made the 1970 cut. Your interview with Dennis in your Tiger Beat office actually made the cut. So if anybody wants to see Anne, they can see her in the 1970 version. But unfortunately, it was taken out of the 2001 remaster, wasn't it?
Yes, but then when they brought out the box set years later, it has both in it. It has the original cut and the recut, which is just they cut out all the interviews and they put in more stage. So it's it's all Elvis. And then ours, tells the story of the Elvis fan and fans and all that. So it still exists, and wow.
I remember something you actually said in the 1970 version was being an Elvis fan is like being in love.
Yes. You don't know how it happens, but you just fall in love.
Yeah.
And that describes, my thing with Elvis, because I was not a fan for many years, and then, oh boy, then he won me over like nobody's business.
What's your feelings on Elvis after 1970, sort of from 1970 to 1977?
Well, we went back to some shows in 70, later in 71, just with friends, paying our own way, and just because it was so much fun. And we noticed a marked difference by that time, because sometimes when Elvis would come out, I mean, we got a total kick out of it. We thought it was cool, but he acted like he was high on something, and we said he acted like he had been smoking weed. Well, I think with Elvis, it wasn't that he had been smoking weed. He was taking various pills, but he would, he'd be singing "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog," and he'd lean over, and then he'd start riffing. He goes, "Oh, I'm watching a bead of sweat roll down my nose," and he'd just be this kind of stone guy. But we felt like we were being privy to a little more insight into Elvis. We thought, oh gosh, we get to see him, at his most relaxed. And, we had no idea that what we were seeing was him starting to take, different drugs and become hooked on them. And I personally never saw him once he started to gain weight, and not for that reason, but because, my husband talked me into leaving Tiger Beat and moving from Southern California. So I miss those times. But, even when you see Elvis in Hawaii or some of those, the one thing that was always true was that voice.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking, because, I mean, he could have been like Frank Sinatra singing into his very senior years, or I Left My Heart in San Francisco. I mean, he would never have lost one fan if he had just aged naturally, and maybe his shows would have changed a little bit when he wasn't doing karate chops or something. But it's like, it just, his life was cut short, and therefore we were robbed of having that experience of see him, become a mature, older man. And I know the voice would have remained. That's the, the tragedy of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we all say as Elvis fans that the voice never failed him, even in the last
Never.
the last filmed television special when he does Unchained Melody. I mean, he just nails it.
Yes. I mean, so I do remember hearing when he died, and I mean, I was so shaken. My friend Tony, who went to the comeback special with me, he was my first husband's closest friend, and by now he was a very famous criminal defense attorney in Los Angeles. And he called us up and he said, "I'm sending flowers in our name." And it's like, oh, thank God. And then I really came full circle. I think it's 2018. Elvis, Graceland invited me to be a guest speaker at Elvis Week in 2018. And so it was the first time I saw Graceland. I got to stand beside his grave and his brother's grave and his mother's grave. And it was just, it was so moving. And then what we just, of course, I wasn't with my first husband anymore. I was with my husband of 41 years, Tony, and not the other Tony, new Tony. And what we were most struck by, I mean, they've done such a beautiful job at Graceland of the exhibits they've built so that you get to travel back through his life. But what we were most fascinated with was this room where they just have these huge cabinets like architectural, where you'd have architectural things with the little thin drawers that pull out. But in there, they have like every slip of paper. The curator said to us, she said, we are so fortunate. She said, Elvis's dad saved every piece of paper. And he kind of worked at keeping the books during those years. And so you pull out the drawers, and here's the receipt for the swimming pool for Graceland. And it's like $12,000, and that had to be like back in the 50s or something, maybe the 60s. And then there's contracts. There's every piece of minutia you could ever want to see about Elvis, but it's all preserved perfectly. And of course, then when you go through, parts of the house, you see Lisa Marie's room and her crib, and it's just you get to like touch what his life was about, and it's so beautifully done. And when I was there, they had a whole exhibit of Elvis in the Army, and they had his uniforms, and they had all kinds of different memorabilia that from that time when he was in the Army. And it's just I just felt like Priscilla did such an amazing job of sharing Elvis and herself and Lisa with the rest of the world in the way they turned Graceland into what it is today. It's not a, yes, things are expensive, but it's such a well done job that I just feel like she really understood what would make an Elvis fan feel closer to him, and very, very successful at it. So that was another, kind of full circle event.
And why do you think that Elvis's popularity is as strong today as it was when he was alive? What did he have that, what was that special? Do you know what that special it was?
Well, it has to be his voice. There's no one that's remotely ever been before or after like his voice. Mm. And I think as his fans got to know him, and it was only through glimpses in movies and things like that, but they got to know Elvis on an intimate level, even though, he never did interviews and those things. You would see bits of him, and they followed his life. And one of the things I wrote when I was writing about him on that stage in the comeback special was, I just noticed as he was singing, and a couple of times, he looked me in the eye, I just felt like for the first time in his life, Elvis really understood the power that he commanded. And he didn't do it in a star-like way. It was just that he knew if he curled his lip when he was looking at you or making a certain move, he just knew how it was going to be received. And then it came right back at him. He knew he had that power, and it just made him more vibrant and more himself. I think the later years you got to see so much more of the real Elvis because he understood what it meant at that point. He wasn't a boy anymore. You know, he was a husband and a father. And I just think he had a different outlook. And it came through. It came through to when you were watching him. And I don't know if that's a good description, but I guess it's my description.
Yeah. Well, I suppose, different people see it in different ways, but you put it very, very well indeed. Now, your book, you wrote a book, Meow, My Groovy Life with Tiger Beat's Teen Idols.
Yes.
Obviously, it includes the information about Elvis. So if anybody wants to read more about your meetings with Elvis, you can read that. But it also covers Tiger Beat and all your other interviews that you've done along the way, such as the Monkees and the Bee Gees and people like that, is it?
And Bobby Sherman and David Cassidy. And David Cassidy, of course, was very big over in the UK. I never thought anyone would ever hear my stories other than a few personal friends I'd shared them with over the years. But then I was working 2012, and it turned out to be my final job. And I worked in an orthodontic office, and all my co-workers were quite young. They were in their 20s. So basically millennials. I came in one day and I said to one of my friends at work, I said, "Oh, I lost a friend today." And they said, and they said they died. And I said, yes, a friend from long ago died. And they said, "Well, who was it?" And I said, "Well, I don't know if you'll know who it is, but it's Davy Jones, of the Monkees." And they said, "Oh, well, we've heard of the Monkees." And that was about it. And I said, "Well, I have lots of pictures." And they said, "Oh, bring your pictures in. We want to see them." So I bring my pictures into the office one day at lunch, and we're looking through them. And they don't recognize all that many, because they weren't born yet, no idea. Of course, they recognized Elvis. I don't think there's a generation that doesn't know who he is.
Instantly recognizable.
Absolutely, no matter where you are in the world. And they said, and because they're millennials, they're sitting there as they're looking at my pictures, and they're Googling me on their phone. And I'm going, "What? You're finding articles about me?" And they go, "This girl says she wanted to be you when she was 12 years old." And I said, "Let me read that." And here this woman, Ann Wicker, had written a blog post about meeting Davy Jones and but she wrote about, I wanted to be Ann Moses when I was 12 years old. She was cool and she was hip and she hung out with all the stars. And I mean, I was just flabbergasted because I had never Googled myself. I just, I went on the internet and would read news a little bit, but I just didn't spend a lot of time there, and I wasn't on social media. So after seeing that, I came home and I thought, well, maybe somebody would be interested if I wrote a blog. So I started my blog. It was called I Used to Be Ann Moses, because I didn't know what else to call it. And so I started writing these stories. So I wrote about how taking Jefferson Airplane to the airport one time and having them ask me to hop on the plane with them. And the next thing I know, I'm photographing the Rolling Stones at the Cow Palace. And one by one, I started recounting stories. And after I'd done a half dozen, could I turn these into a book? But I honestly didn't believe that I could write a book because, my whole life, the only thing I'd ever written were, 3-page articles in magazines. That was the extent of it. I mean, granted, I wrote thousands of them, but still, I thought a book would be too daunting. But I did get in touch with Ann Wicker, who had written that blog post, and she was an author and an editor. And I said, well, if I, put all these blog posts together, and will you help me put it together as a book, and will you edit it? We worked together long distance. We got together for a few weeks of intense work, but after 5 years, we had a book together, and then I published it. And I was so amazed by the reaction, though. And of course, by that time, I was on social media, and I was learning things all the time. It turned out, back at Tiger Beat, we thought our audience was preteen and teenage girls, like 99%. And what we found out all these years later, was that boys were stealing their sisters' Tiger Beat. They were buying it themselves. They were reading it. And of course, I was well read in England by everybody. I found out that, there was a whole generation of boys that were just as interested as in the girls in these garage bands and these new bands that were coming up, whether it was the Turtles or the Rolling Stones or whoever. There were so many great groups and everything. The book has been very well received. And I told some personal stories in there, and about my love affair with Morris Gibb of the Bee Gees,
Mm-hmm.
and, the wonderful time he showed me in London. So there's lots of fun things in there, but it was very cathartic to write the book, to realize that people appreciated what I did back then. And I would have had no way of knowing that all these years later without how the internet has turned the world into a very, very small place. It was so validating for me that the work I did was appreciated by so many people. I mean, it still continues to amaze me to this day. And I'm so lucky to have people appreciate, all the work. And I mean, yeah, it was work, but we all agree it was the best kind of work you could ever have.
Yeah. So I'll repeat that again. Anne's book is Meow, My Groovy Life with Tiger Beat's Teen Idols. It was published in 2017, I believe, but it's still available on Amazon and other outlets, I believe.
It's available on Amazon and at you can get autographed. Well, people in Ireland, it's hard to ship an autographed copy to the UK. It's so expensive. I do sell autographed copies that in the US, but anyone who'd like to buy a book from Amazon, if you'd like me to write a personal note on my stationery so that you have my autograph in there, I'm happy to send that to anyone in the UK just to have that little memento.
Yeah, and also I think you have a website as well. Is it annemoses.com?
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, that's great.
And then there's a lot of blog posts in there that did not appear in the book, so there's still more goodies to read.
Yeah. So check out Anne's website as well. Anne Moses, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. It really has.
Well, I have enjoyed it immensely, Steve. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. And don't forget what I said at the start before we started recording. If you ever come to Ireland, please let me know, and we can hook up.
You can count on it. You can count on it.
And thanks again, Anne, for talking to me.
Oh, it was my absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
We'll talk soon, Steve.
Yes. Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again to Anne for sharing her stories with me. Anne's book, Meow, My Groovy Life with Tiger Beat's Teen Idols, is available on Amazon and her website, annemoses.com. A reminder to join me live on YouTube every Wednesday and Sunday when I have an Elvis quiz, This Day in Elvis History, Elvis Song of the Week, and more. Thanks for listening, and I hope you can join me next time on Elvis the Ultimate Fan Channel.